Hello, today I will be speaking about key developments on food contact materials in Europe. Of course, this is just a snapshot, and also coming from my very personal perspective, I will share with you what I consider the most important developments that occurred recently and that are still ongoing or expected for the near future. So the next few weeks or months. So first of all, let's look at the EU wider policy context. The European Commission in 2020 published a number of new strategies, and here I want to highlight two, namely the EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, or CSS, and the Farm to Fork Strategy. Both strategies are important for food contact materials. The Farm to Fork Strategy mentions FCMs, saying that the Commission will revise the food contact materials legislation to improve food safety and public health, in particular in reducing the use of hazardous chemicals. And in the CSS, food contact is mentioned too here. It says that the Commission will extend the generic approach to risk management to ensure that consumer products, including among other things, food contact materials, etc., do not contain chemicals that cause cancers, gene mutations, affect the reproductive or endocrine system, or are persistent and bioaccumulative. So in both strategies, there's a clear commitment to get rid of chemicals that have hazard properties of concern. And in CSS, a very clear focus on the generic approach to risk management, which effectively means that hazardous chemicals are not allowed in food contact materials. So that's the strategy. But what is the current situation? Are hazardous chemicals in food contact materials? Yes, they are. This is the current legal definition of safety. This is Article 3 of the Food Contact Materials Framework Regulation, and it states that materials and articles shall be manufactured so that under normal or foreseeable conditions of use, they do not transfer their constituents to food in quantities which could endanger human health. So the key word here is the quantities. This definition essentially assumes that for any chemical, whether it has hazard properties of concern or not, it can be used safely as long as it is below a certain threshold level. But this now is not aligned with the requirements of the strategies. In the strategies, hazardous chemicals are not permitted to be used or to be present regardless of the levels. So then the question is, will Article 3 of the Framework Regulation be revised? Right now, we have a commitment of the European Commission to revise the Food Contact Materials Regulation, and we're waiting for the Commission to publish its impact assessment for public commenting. This was announced that it would happen in the first quarter of 2022. But based on the text in the CSS and the Farm to Fork Strategy, one would assume that yes, the safety definition and the framework regulation must be modernized and adapted. And I actually have a concrete proposal for how to do this. But before I show you that, here are three more reasons, and also two at least recent developments, why Article 3 should be changed. So the first reason is about bisphenol A, or BPA. In December 2021, the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA, published a draft scientific opinion evaluating new scientific evidence on BPA. And EFSA concluded that a new tolerable daily intake must be set for BPA. This new tolerable daily intake should be 100,000 times below the current tolerable daily intake, or TDI, that was set in 2015. And if this new TDI is adopted, then a new migration limit for BPA would have to be set, and that would have to be at least 2.4 nanograms per kilogram food. Most likely it would have to be below this, because in its last change to the migration limit for BPA, the Commission also considered other sources of exposure to BPA than food contact. And indeed, BPA is a high production volume chemical, and humans are exposed to it not only from FCMs, but also many other sources. So migration limit would probably have to take into consideration these other exposure sources, and then consequently be below 2 nanograms per kilogram food. And so 2 nanograms per kilogram food, that is 2 parts per trillion. That's very, very low. And I wonder if that actually is a migration limit that is indeed too low to enforce. And that then begs the question, what are the ramifications of this recent EFSA scientific opinion also for other authorized substances? And that takes us to the second reason why I think that the safety definition has to be changed. And that is the non-monotonic dose responses. This is a phenomenon that we know chemicals can behave in such a way that they don't follow the dose makes the poison. In October last year, EFSA published its opinion on the impact of non-monotonic dose responses on EFSA's human health risk assessment. It concludes that the dose makes the poison principle that is inherent to Article 3's safety definition cannot be applied universally in chemical risk assessment because for substances with non-monotonic dose responses in the low dose range, more detailed assessments are required. And they write that if a non-monotonic dose response is observed for an apical effect, the understanding of the underlying mechanisms is necessary to assess its biological plausibility and to consider the consequences for the risk assessment process. Well, what does this mean? Well, if during hazard characterization, which is a normal step during chemical risk assessment, you see that at low doses, effects occur in a whole organism that are not seen at higher doses, then you have to figure out what is going on. And EFSA explicitly say that a mechanistic understanding is then required for risk assessment. So you have to really understand what is going on a molecular level in the whole organism. Now, as a short comment, mechanistic understanding for how chemicals exert their toxic effects is not something you come by easily. It can mean years or even decades of work. In fact, there are not many chemicals for which we have very good mechanistic understanding of their modes of action. So this really can be a huge challenge to figure out. But in addition, what does it imply? Does it mean that all previously authorized substances that have been found suitable for use in food contact will get reassessed? Because these chemicals were authorized based on data that certainly cannot exclude existence of non-monotonic dose responses in the low dose range. Therefore, I wonder if this EFSA opinion actually means opening up a can of worms. Or alternatively, it can also be interpreted as implying the need for a new approach to chemical risk assessment and chemical risk management based on inherent hazard properties, which are much easier to assess than identifying non-monotonic dose responses in the low dose range and then drilling down into the exact mechanisms for such observations. So I wonder what the Commission will decide is an appropriate next step for dealing with this. And then there's the third issue, the third reason, which is not a recent development, but it's been discussed for many years now, and it's very important. And this is the mixtures. Many different chemicals in food contact materials migrate simultaneously. Of course, this depends on the food contact material type, and it depends on the food that is in contact with the material. For some food contact materials, several hundred to 1,000 chemicals can migrate at the same time, all at very low doses. In addition, humans are not exposed to chemicals only from food contact materials, but also from many other sources. And for protecting health, what counts at the end of the day is the total chemical load that a person is exposed to. Therefore, setting safe exposure levels for individual chemicals that migrate from food contact materials at the same time is not sufficiently protective for public health. And mixtures is also a topic that is addressed in the chemicals strategy for sustainability. And I think that the Commission is addressing this specifically for food contact material migration. So all these reasons show that the current approach to safety based on the quantity of a chemical that migrates from a food contact material is outdated. It's not supported by our current scientific understanding. Or to put it simply, it means that low levels of chemicals are not automatically safe levels. And the simplest way to ensuring safety is to not allow hazardous chemicals to be present in food contact materials. So here is my proposal for changing Article 3. Materials and articles shall be manufactured so that they do not contain constituents which could endanger human health. This takes care of both the intentionally used and the non-intentionally added substances. And now I'd like to move on to 4 other recent or upcoming developments that I consider relevant, namely recycled plastics, printed food contact materials, styrene, and the prioritization of authorized chemicals for reassessment. So first, recycled plastics for food contact. Here, the Commission published a new draft regulation in December 2021 that would replace the EU Regulation 282/2008. And the Commission held a public consultation on the draft. And right now, the draft is with the Standing Committee, where it will be discussed and possibly voted on the 24th of March. But just to summarize, the draft regulation has been received quite controversially by very different stakeholders. For example, a group of European NGOs, environmental and health NGOs, sent a letter to Commissioner of Health, Dr. Stella Kyriakides, and they voiced their concern with the draft regulation, stating that it does not sufficiently protect public health. And another recent development I'd like to share is the publication of a systematic review article on PET beverage bottles, of which I'm a co-author. And here we looked at all publicly available data on migration from virgin and recycled PET. And we found that hazardous chemicals do migrate from virgin PET, but the levels of migration are higher in recycled PET. And also importantly, BPA is found to migrate from recycled PET. So if you want to know more about the letter sent by the NGOs to the Commissioner, you can have a look here. The new study on PET and migrating chemicals is available here. Okay, next on my list is the new German ordinance on printed food contact materials. This was issued in early December. And what's really new here is that it contains a positive list of substances for inks and varnishes. And some of those chemicals have specific migration limits. This is basically work that was adopted from work done by Council of Europe. Only Switzerland so far, who's not an EU member, has implemented this regulation, and now Germany is following. Then the Commission is zooming in on styrene, and it published a survey recently where it requests stakeholder input on the use and migration of styrene from food contact materials. This survey is open until 11th of April, in case you would like to comment. And EFSA has also been asked to work on styrene, but apparently this work has not started yet at EFSA. And I personally think that this is a very important topic. And we at the Food Packaging Forum are planning to hold a webinar on styrene specifically, where we will speak about its use, about migration and toxicity. We haven't set a date for this yet, but it will be sometime April, May, June. Just keep a look out on our website for more information on this shortly. And last but not least, another EFSA opinion, this one on the prioritization of phthalate alternatives used as plasticizers and authorized for use in food contact plastics. This was published in November of last year as part of the draft scientific opinion on phthalates. And I actually submitted detailed comments to EFSA on this opinion, which you can find online. But briefly, I highlighted methodological shortcomings of the prioritization approach, which lacked a systematic approach. And I'm also not clear why EFSA chose to focus only on plasticizers and not instead prioritize all authorized substances for reassessment, as would be warranted, in my opinion, based on what the European Commission has put out in its strategies. So here we still have to wait for EFSA's response to see how things will move forward. And to end, I want to highlight what we at Food Packaging Forum will be focusing on in the next few months. in addition, of course, to the styrene webinar. So we will be publishing our own prioritization of food contact chemicals that have hazard properties of concern as detailed under the CSS. This is a peer-reviewed manuscript that's currently under review. And this paper contains lists of chemicals that, according to CSS and Farm to Fork, should no longer be used for food contact materials. Next, we're working on publishing our systematic evidence map of chemicals that were measured to migrate from food contact materials or which were found to be present in food contact materials. This will be a publicly available resource for everyone to use. And I do hope that it will be online by the end of the second quarter of this year. We have a manuscript also currently in peer review on this, so fingers crossed that this will come out soon. And this is a fantastic resource, which, yeah, I hope to share more with you soon. And finally, this is not new, but we're focusing on how to better integrate the issue of sustainable packaging with the chemicals issue. And last year, we published a new tool together with a large stakeholder collaboration called the Understanding Packaging Scorecard. And I invite you to take a look at that. It does feature chemicals of concern as well. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you for your interest.